1967, the regionalization movement in Sovietizing America existed in two prongs. First, planning regions. You should be familiar with this. You should be reading this in your newspaper. And economic development regions. Why? The similarity of regionalization emerging in the USA and in communist Russia is strikingly apparent by comparing Moscow-published maps, graphs, and books placed side by side with radical legislation such as Public Law 89-136, approved by the 89th Congress. Regional government. Another researcher said, to understand regional government, it is necessary to know that metro and regional government are the same. Government of an area or region by a central body of appointed officials who have unlimited and unconstitutional power. If you want to change the structure of America, you take away our right to be represented. You know, the colonists had a tea party because it was taxation without representation. This is just so you know, this is a website on decentralized cooperative programs through the United Nations, all about national regional governments for sustainable development. The Habitat Agenda in 1996, and I'm not going to read this, promotes decentralization through democratic local authorities. Here we have an idea of how they're just going to merge the counties and the townships. You can see the colored areas, the different colored areas. That is what they're doing. Executive Order 13083, which was issued in 1998, federalism, redefined the word state so that it includes all levels. It delineates between the Constitution and federalism. It changes sovereign powers granted to states so that federal agencies have control over states. And it allows the president to declare national emergency, which gives FEMA powers to direct federal, state, and local government versus total control over the communications, power, and food. Alabama, I spoke last year in Alabama on regional government. They have their own regional government. It's called ARC. It's a public organization encompassing a multi-jurisdictional region, and it is tied to local governments and is a non-profit organization. Here you just have a map from their website, the regional map. You can see how they're changing the state. They have business partners. This is a buyout between government and business. Here you have, I even showed this a year ago when I was in Alabama. I said, you're not alone, look at what Tulsa's doing. All right? How many of you knew about this? How many of you now understand what's happening? A few of you. All right. Stalin said, divide the world into regional groups as a transition stage to world government. Populations will more readily abandon their national loyalties to a vague regional loyalty than they will for a world authority. Later, the regions can be brought all the way into a single world dictatorship. Let's take a look at our last player, the International Criminal Court. This picture was taken by me right before it was voted into existence in Rome in 1998. You talk about chilling, absolutely chilling. The International Criminal Court, it's the first time an international organization transcends sovereignty in order to arrest someone who is an alleged international criminal. This has not happened since Rome. There is no jury, there is no recourse, and you are guilty until proven innocent. The international crimes that someone can be arrested for include crimes against humanity, war crimes, and genocide. Recently, I saw the movie, The Translator, I think, is that what it's called? The Translator? The Interpreter. Close. The Interpreter. Now, my sister thought it was a great movie, and she wanted me to see it because of the dynamics and fast pace and on and on. And after we got done, she asked me what I thought, and I said, it's an absolutely horrible movie. She was shocked. She didn't understand. I said, this will put in the minds of men, speaking in the minds of men, the idea that we need an international criminal court. It is going to make psychologically the idea, put it psychologically in you, that we need an international criminal court to try horrible people. Guess who some of those horrible people in the future might be? To arrest an international criminal, you need to harmonize laws so that you can search in a foreign country, you can serve an arrest warrant, you can jail and detain, you can extradite to The Hague. All these laws need to be changed. All these rules need to be bent in order to do this. Currently, going on in the world, there's an exchange of police officers and law enforcement academies set up in Budapest and Santiago. There are FBI training centers, there's 2 of them, and there's 18 joint terrorist forces. We have the International Criminal Court, and we're going to break for 5 minutes. See you in 5. Let's take a look at, they say he who owns the gold makes the rules. So with that, let's take a look at the global economics and how the world is ordered. We did all the other major players in the first segment. Now we're going to take a look at the economic players, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, which was set up in 1944. What happened when the barriers between the nation states fell? Again, we know that we are a world without borders. We are integrated and interdependent. Again, we talked about the top level here, the power players, IOSCO, the Bank for International Settlements, and the International Association of Insurance Supervisors. However, long before this international level came into play between the nation states and the powers, the barriers between the nation states fell, there were evil men planning to control the monetary system of the world. The concept of a central bank came from Sweden, which was the first to form a private company to lend to the government, the Swedish government, with no fixed time period for repayment. The central banks that were formed started with Sweden in 1688, and then it went to the Bank of England in 1694. Then the Bank of France, there's others in between. And so now you can take a look at the number of central banks. Pretty much most of the countries of the world have a central bank. I want you to see that when Russia spun off their satellite countries in the 90s, they all got a central bank. And surprise, surprise, the most recent central bank is Iraq. That's exactly what you do when you take over a country. You change the entire monetary system and you control it. So Iraq is really under a rock, aren't they? Ha, no pun intended. This is a picture of the Bank of England. This is one of the most powerful central banks in the world. I'm not sure that the United States Federal Reserve is more powerful than this. Why? They control and they offer, they have some of the world's largest gold trading going on from this central bank. The Federal Reserve does not. The Bank of England was birthed in 1694 when William Patterson, he was just, they call him, and I got this from the Bank of England museum. They called him a rogue businessman. Proposed raising 1.2 million British pounds to be lent to the government on the condition that its subscribers, or investors, were incorporated as a stock company. We are talking about the modern corporation here, all right? Now, this is Edward Wessex, otherwise known as Prince Edward. You know, I had always wondered if I were royalty, especially the British royalty, what I would want to do is be a subscriber or an investor in all the central banks of the world. Doesn't that make sense to you? But in order to carry out my thesis, I had to find out if the British royal family had invested in the Bank of England. And I did not know where to get this information. And when I was there, of course, they wouldn't tell me. Somebody called me and said, Prince Edward has this series of movies on Crown and Country. You ought to buy whatever number this one was. And I did. And I was so impressed. Look at this. He's talking about money. He's gotten money from an ATM machine. Do you think he knows what money is really all about? But I thought it was pretty interesting. Now, in setting up a central bank where a private corporation would lend to the government, they would not have any fixed time period to repay, and interest would be paid in perpetuity, forever. This is like a giant credit card that no one pays off the balance, and they're charged interest in perpetuity. It was called the Bank for Perpetual Interest. Here is King William II. He was the largest investor, or one of the largest investors, at £10,000. That was a fair amount of money in those days, considering that they raised £1.2 million. Here is the actual document, and here it says £10,000. And we went from gold to paper, because that's what it signified. Josiah Stamp, director and president of the Bank of England during the 1920s, said this: the modern banking system manufactures money out of nothing. How true. The process is perhaps the most astounding piece of sleight of hand that was ever invented. Take this great power away from the bankers, and all the great fortunes like mine will disappear. And they ought to disappear, for this would be a better and happier world to live in. But if you want to continue the slaves of bankers and pay the cost of your own slavery, let them continue to control money and credit. Every central bank in every country issues their own money. If you know, if you take $1 or $10, $20, $50, whatever, out of your wallet, it will not say that it is issued by the United States Treasury. It will say Federal Reserve Note. In the United States in 1913, through the cunning craftiness of a number of key senators and congressmen, the Federal Reserve Act was passed at 11:45 p.m., December 24th. While all of those God-fearing men, family men, went home to celebrate Christmas, those who wanted a Federal Reserve, a central bank, stayed and voted. They had a quorum. The Federal Reserve Bank was birthed. In the 1990s, the powers of central banks worldwide were harmonized. The Federal Reserve already had these powers, but all the other Federal Reserves, like the Bank of England, the Bank of Japan, the Bank of France, were given the ability to set interest rates. In other words, what do we need Congress for? To set interest rates. That's pretty powerful. What that means is you have an insider group of men that, when they lower interest rates, create a boom in the housing and the stock market, and when they raise interest rates, they have the ability to cause a country to go into recession or depression just by controlling interest rates. And our Federal Reserve already had that. They can intervene in foreign exchange markets. They can set inflation and monetary targets. This is pretty serious. All of the central banks of the world meet at the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland. Carol Quigley, Bill Clinton's mentor, said in his book, Tragedy and Hope, the apex of financial capitalism was to be the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, a private bank owned and controlled by the world's central banks, which they themselves are private corporations. So let's take a look at this picture. Let's just visualize. Every country of the world, that's what those little dots are, they represent a central bank in every country. So let's take a look at Madagascar. I think that's Madagascar. Here you have the whole world monetary system controlled by private corporations. Would it be far-fetched to believe that there is a very powerful inner core group of men who control or who are shareholders of many and most of these corporations? No, not at all. The apex is the Bank for International Settlements. They all meet there. God has been very gracious. I have had the opportunity to cover the last annual meetings at the Bank for International Settlements. You have to be invited. They only hold one public press briefing a year. And they used to give me 2 questions, but now they've reduced me to 1. I guess I'm part of the family. So what do you think happens when most of the countries of the world decide that they're not going to go along with the Bank for International Settlements? What do you think happened when the Asian crises occurred? Oh, let me go back to that. What do you think occurred? Let me go back one more. The bottom, let's take a look at this. Madagascar, all right? Some little country with a central bank. For whatever reason, they decide they're going to disband their central banking system. They don't want any part of it. They want to go back to where their Congress or their parliament makes the decisions over the financial system. What do you think would happen? All the central banks of the world have a way to bring them back in line. What do? They just put out the word, sell the currency of Madagascar. Sell the currency of Madagascar. In a split second, they can crash any country in the world. They can crash any country in the world. What do you think happened with the Asian financial crises? The World Trade Organization has something called the Financial Services Agreement. And what it calls for is for all countries to lower the barriers in their country so that foreign banks, insurance companies, and brokerage firms can buy up that country's banks, insurance companies, and brokerage firms. Japan, Korea, Malaysia, and Thailand said, no, we don't want that. That was the Asian crisis. Several years ago, the Bank for International Settlements took greater power over the whole international infrastructure. And they set up something called the Financial Stability Forum, which said they're going to bring together an interesting mix of very powerful men from the G7. The G7 is the G8 minus Russia. The United States, Germany, Japan, Italy, France, Great Britain, and England. They're going to bring the central bank ministers. Now, those are the people who, head up that private corporation, plus 4 more from Belgium, Luxembourg, Sweden, and Holland, along with the G7 finance ministers, those are the secretaries of the Treasury, along with, this is unheard of, NASDAQ, the National Association of Security Commissions, and I also believe the New York Stock Exchange. The regulatory agencies of these countries, they all comprise the Financial Stability Forum, and this group, along with some other organizations, we have IOSCO, the stock exchanges, IAIS, the insurance, the World Bank, and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development in Paris. And they're now looking over the whole global world. What happened to our Treasury? What happened to what our Treasury is supposed to do? It's basically defunct. These are the men who truly run the world. These are the G7 finance minister and central bankers, including Alan Greenspan. I paid a lot of money for this picture, so I'm going to continue to use it. They don't give these out free. And why did I buy it? Because these are the men who rule the world. Whoever controls the money controls the country. Oh, yes. They all wore a tie. Don't they all look like the Bobbsey twins? The tie had the symbol of the euro, the yen, the dollar, and gold on it. In other words, all the money, they control it. When the world has no borders, you can then put new structures and new rules of the road in place. So let's take a look at what has been going on with our money. First, destroying the value of sound money, adopting an economic philosophy, creating a market-led world, and erasing nation-specific laws. the destruction of the value of money. As you know, Nixon took our dollar off the gold standard. And we went from gold, a tangible, to money, which is fiat. Fiat means there's nothing backing it. Of course, they will say to you that it's the faith in our government that supports the value of the dollar. You will see that that too has changed. For the first time in history, the whole monetary system of the world is backed by zero. You know, from Ur of Chaldees, the ancient trading routes, they used cattle, gold, silver, jewels, and expensive clothing. That was their monetary system, a tangible. We're into nothing, which means you can degrade, you can do anything. Rape, rob, and pillage by just changing the value of a country's currency. 2, they adopted an economic philosophy of control. It's called capitalism. Is anybody surprised? Capitalism is an ism. I was sitting at my desk analyzing this, and I said, capitalism, communism, Marxism, socialism. I determined all by myself that when you take out of capitalism honesty, morality, and integrity, you come up with tyranny. What is capitalism? Capitalism needs new markets, new products, new customers, continuously and constantly all the time. I call this Pac-Man capitalism. Joseph Schumpeter, an economist who taught at Harvard, said, the essential point to grasp is that in dealing with capitalism, we are dealing with an evolutionary process. In other words, you can't allow capitalism to fall. Capitalism then is by nature a form or method of economic change, and not only never is, but can never be stationary. In other words, in order to keep capitalism from falling, you need to create if you need to create a war, so be it. Why? War is a transfer of wealth. War is an economic stimulus. And to go along with capitalism, continuous movement in the market, you need to create a market-led world. What is that? Well, I'm going to show you. In order to get to this, you have to repeal national laws. First, the 1980 Monetary Deregulation Act opened up our borders for investing. Before that, Americans could not invest outside of the U.S. and foreigners could not invest inside. So we now have, from 1980, international and foreign mutual funds. They invest outside of America. Foreigners now can invest here. It eliminated interest ceilings by banks. Now, let me explain what has happened. Up until then, the bank had to pay a minimum amount of interest on savings, and you could not be raped, robbed, and pillaged by paying 15 to 18 to 20% interest on credit cards or mortgages or what have you. When they eliminated this ceiling and this floor that banks could charge and banks could pay, they deregulated it, that's the key word, deregulated it, so that today banks pay 2 to 3% on savings and certificates of deposit, and they charge you 7, 8, whatever in mortgage, and if you're a bad person, you're going to pay 25 to 30% on your credit card. Do you see what they did? And this law did it. But it did something else. When it opened up our borders, $1.9 trillion moves around the world on a daily basis looking for the highest return, the quickest play. Second, they repealed the Glass-Steagall Act, which was put in place in 1933. When we had the stock market crash, the Glass-Steagall Act was passed. It separated the functions of banking from the stock market. And it put firewalls in place so that we couldn't have a new 1929 crash. It created what they call financial conglomerates, merging banks, brokerage firms, and insurance companies. In other words, we went back to 1929 in our stock market. Oh, yes. I better do this quick. You know the NASDAQ? It is because they took away all of the firewalls that they were able to create the NASDAQ. That's what it was, because there were no guards against it. We then have the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. The two architects were John Maynard Keynes on the right and Harry Dexter White. They were both of the same ilk, communists. The World Bank and the IMF were set up to transition world economies to a borderless world. The IMF created its own currency. It's called the special drawing right. In 1974, they adopted guidelines to manage a world on paper. The World Bank sets up stock exchanges around the world. All the third world countries that don't have a stock exchange, they set up. They also have created a global bond market. You know, you can buy McDonald's stock or bonds in French francs. We've had a huge increase in the growth of activity. In 1980, we invested $53 billion outside the U.S., and in 2001, it grew to $5.1 trillion. Similarly, foreigners are investing in the U.S. from $198 billion in 1980 to $20 trillion in 2001. Now, let's go to the importance of a market-led democracy. I was in a G7 finance ministers, and Secretary Snow said, we recognize that we are so interdependent, there's that word, that growth in Asia is important to us, and our growth is important to Japan, and Japan's growth is important to the Euro nations, and so on, so that we are all interconnected in ways that one nation's growth feeds and assists in other parts of the globe. The market is central to growth. The value of the dollar is to be determined not by the market and not the strength of policy of government. So what are they saying? The state of the world before market-based democracy, you had government and business, they were separate. Then John Maynard Keynes came along and he said to government, just deficit spend. And the result of deficit spending is that we're $8 trillion in debt. What a great plan. You have all levels of government today are broke, and we have business with the money and jobs. Then Friedrich von Hayek came along, and he said, hey, I've got a solution. All government has to do is sell their assets. I literally call that the plucking of assets. It is. It's the plucking of assets of government. Then Thatcher came along, and Reagan came along, and they said similar things, and they decided that they were going to sell off government. And what did they do? They created something called public-private partnership. Now, you have three words here. It took me a while to figure this out. First of all, what they said is partnership. That's a business arrangement to make money. There are two levels of partners. There are the public levels, which are government, local, county, state, federal, international, foreign, the United Nations. Then you have private. Those are the corporations, the foundations, the labor unions, nonprofits, and even churches. You put them together. All levels of government there, multinational corporations, and then the NGOs, whether it's the Sierra Club or International Planned Parenthood Federation. Got it? You come together, and you are then able, so a government needs to sell off its water authority. Well, government doesn't want to make it look like it's an outright, transfer of asset, so they bring in business and they bring in the non-governmental organizations, and the bottom line is, this is now a new business. It's a business, and they're now going to set the rates for the water authority. So the little old lady who gets her water bill says, I can't afford this. She calls up and they say, hey lady, we're in business to make money. We're not here to service you. What happens? A shift in power from government to business, higher taxation, taxation without representation, and that is the beginning of market-led democracy. So, what is the market? Here is the market. This is the market. Andrew Crockett said, because then I started seeing that all the big boys were talking about the transformation from a government-controlled financial system to a market-led global financial system. That's exactly what Snow said. So here's the market. The market is comprised of stocks, bonds, whether they're corporate or treasury, mortgages, auto loans, credit card paper. What? Wait a minute. What is happening? Mortgages and auto loans. There was a time when banks held your mortgage. If you had trouble, you could go down to Susie Q at the local bank and tell her it's a rough month. She'd say, pay what you can. That no longer happens. Banks are now selling your mortgage, and it's going into the stock market. Who's buying it? The Saudi Arabians, the Russians, the Japanese. Japanese are the biggest buyer of mortgages. And now the Chinese. Credit card paper. Do you think that the banks are holding your Visa card? You know why they're charging 30% interest rates? Because it's going into the market and they want to entice investors. Mutual funds, derivatives, commodities, futures, and now currencies. You see, government is being completely sold off so that it is no longer government that supports the value of their own currency. It is the stock market. Everything is going into the market. So how do you transfer wealth? You skim off the top. It's called market adjustments, or highs and lows. It's facilitated by central banks, and he who has the most shares wins. Now, if you'll give me just another 2 seconds, or 2 minutes, let me talk about the coming global stock exchange. It's basically here. This is a diagram. You can find this in my book, The United Nations Global Straitjacket. And here it shows all the different stock markets of the world. In the last 10 years, all the different stock exchanges have been going public. That means that they now you can buy shares of these stock exchanges on the stock exchange. Most recently, so we now have, let me just say that while it's now possible to buy stock on the stock exchange, at the same time, regionally, there's that word again, regionally, you were having all of the stock exchanges go into a regional stock. So Oslo and Stockholm, Copenhagen, Helsinki are now part of the Nordic exchange. They have one exchange for the region. With the European Union, you have the Euronext, and all the individual stock exchanges are now merging. The London Stock Exchange is independent. They went public. Philadelphia is still a private corporation. Amex is to go public next year. The NASDAQ went public 3 years ago. The New York Stock Exchange just went public. And the president said that in the future, they expect they are going to make transatlantic alliances. The New York Stock Exchange expects to be involved in takeovers, including in Europe, after completing its transformation into a public company. That took place in March. And so we now are at a point whereby the NASDAQ just bought 18% of the London Stock Exchange. That doesn't mean that there's not room for the New York. The New York could still buy the other remaining 82% if they can. Or the London Stock Exchange might want to buy the Euronext. So stay tuned. The coming global stock exchange. And in the meantime, they have been setting up all the support systems for this. They now have, did you know that they've been moving towards a global accounting system? And every country, one by one, has been switching. China just switched to a global accounting system. They have other things that support a global stock exchange. Custody system, settlement system, a clearing system, customs agreement. The goal is to make the stock exchange like global telecommunications. I don't think I have to explain that to you. And so, what does a global stock exchange need to facilitate commerce? It needs a global currency. There were some geniuses, including Paul Volcker, who met in 2003 in Italy to talk about the possibility of maybe a global currency. Currently, between 1999 and 2001, 97% of all bonds are issued in 5 currencies. I had an opportunity to interview Paul Volcker, who's the taller man on the left, who used to be the Federal Reserve chairman. And I interviewed him a couple years ago. And I asked him what he saw for the future. And he said, well, for the long term, but it's a long ways off, if we are going to be successful in a globalized world, we should have an international currency. And I said, like the special drawing right? And he said, no, it would be more than that. And I said, like what? Well, when Paul Volcker at 7 feet turns his back on somebody who's 5 feet, the interview is over. In 2005, the Bank for International Settlements talked about possibly moving towards a single currency or perhaps a regional currency block. And so I asked the general manager, Dr. Knight, about it, and he said, the question you ask is not an easy one about regional currencies. I think that movements to a regional currency are a long way off. Not really. 6 months later, they issued a working paper that said, guess what? We must possibly go to a gold standard, that's a bunch of garbage, to a single international currency or maybe a regional currency. So I think in the future, as we take a look at what's going on, especially with oil, oil has been sold in dollars since 1973 and 74. There are countries who are saying, I want off the dollar, and if I want to buy oil, I want to buy it in euros. I think in order to save the American economy, which is dependent on selling oil in dollars, in order to keep us from a total crash, we have to switch to, I think, a basket of currencies. So that's my prediction. Stay tuned, and it's time for lunch. Because of our time together, we're going to go through Agenda 21, and then I would like to end with a spiritual dimension. With regard to the spiritual dimension, we're going to go, I'm just going to close out one screen and go into another to get to the spiritual dimension that I have prepared. What I'm about to say spiritually does not mean that we should be robots and just say to somebody who takes our land, I forgive you. That's not it. It does not pertain to anything in the future. It pertains to us and our heart response to others. I'm not talking about specifically world government, okay? So, with that, I would like to begin, and we are going to discuss conventional warfare versus spiritual warfare. We had the Phoenicians, and they knew how to conquer by the sea. Then there was Alexander the Great, and he did it by horse. Jeremiah 8:16 says, the snorting of his, meaning Babylonian, horses was heard from Dan. The whole land trembled at the sound of the neighing of his strong ones, for they are come and have devoured the land and all that is in it, the city and those that dwell therein. What am I saying here? There was a time in warfare when you could hear the armies coming. You could hear, you knew, you could feel the danger. But that is no longer. War has changed. Yes, there was Hitler. Yes, there were the concentration camps. Yes, there was Nagasaki. Do you think those people knew 2 seconds or 2 minutes before that bomb was dropped what was going to happen? No. This is something I'd like to read to you about the Soviet occupation of Poland. This is what we call communism, fast and quick. On September 17th, 1939 at 2:15 a.m., the Polish ambassador to the USSR was summoned to the Soviet Foreign Office. There, M. Potemkin read him a note to the effect that the Soviets regarded the Polish government as disintegrated and the Polish state as having, in fact, ceasing to exist. Accordingly, the Soviet government had ordered its troops to cross the Polish border and take, under their protection, the life and property of the population of Western Ukraine and the Western White Russia. There are different kinds of warfare being waged today, worldwide, but also for the assets and the soul of America, because we live here, and for the world. The war of the soul is being waged on the international level and on the spiritual level. And here we're going to talk the spiritual level. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And the earth was without form and void. And darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light, it was good. God divided the light from darkness. And God called the light day. And the darkness he called night. And God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters. And let it divide the waters from the firmament." And God called the firmament heaven. And God said, "Let the waters and the heaven be gathered into one place, and let dry land appear." And God said, "Let the earth bring forth grass, the herbs yielding seed, and fruit trees yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth." And it was so. And the earth brought forth grass, and herb yielding seed. And God said, "Let there be lights to divide the day from the night, and let there be seasons." And God made the two great lights, and the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. And he made the stars also. And God said, "Let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creatures that has life, the fowl that it may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven." And God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness," and he made male and female. And God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish and the sea, the fowl and the air, and every living creature that moves on the earth. And let them have dominion over," well, I always like to repeat. That is until Agenda 21. What is Agenda 21? What did it do? What does it mean? Up until 1992, from the beginning of time, the world was ordered under a Christian worldview. Man had dominance over the earth. That's what the Word said. That's what was taught. That's what was believed. Up until 1992, when the Rio Earth Summit was unveiled publicly for people on planet Earth. That worldview is pagan, based on the worship of the earth goddess Gaia. And it basically says that the earth has dominance over man. This is a perversion, an inversion of Genesis 1. The values of America are being radically changed. The UN has succeeded in altering and changing God's Word. Agenda 21, what is it? As I showed you, 1,300 pages of rules and taxes to control every aspect of life on planet Earth. Who went to the Rio Earth Summit in 1992? 179 governments, not all the governments. World leaders, business leaders, scientists, and key non-governmental organizations involved in the environment, reducing the population, and social planning. Let me just say here that when we start taking a look at Agenda 21 and what it calls for, a complete reordering of the earth, why would businessmen care? Because this is one of the most diabolical marketing schemes and plans in the history of the world. You're going to take people from the car or the gas car and put them in the electric car. Think of all the new business and what people would have to buy. You're going to take them from the car and put them in trains. Guess what? Some company's going to provide all those trains. Do you understand what I'm saying? This is a major squeeze the Charmin. But besides being a marketing plan, and that's why the business were there, it is completely, as you see, diabolical. It is reordering the earth. The last time the earth was reordered was when Eve ate the fruit. And you and I will agree that that was pretty major. So, Agenda 21 has to do with sustainable development, the Biological Diversity Treaty, which is known as smart growth, and two areas that we're not going to talk about, the forest and climate change. What does it say? First, the earth cannot feed and sustain 8.5 billion people. People are destroying the earth, so we need to be contained. That's smart growth. Animals have more value than people. They need to roam freely. The shoe's on the other foot, you see. Or should I say the shoe is on the wrong hoof. Built into the 1,300 pages is a socialistic transfer of wealth. The haves to the have-nots. There is a reordering of property rights and individual rights. The elimination of representative government. So when we take a look at what this means, we're going to see that over and over again, they have these things built into the entire agenda, including regional government. I just want to show you the United Nations had their first major global environmental conference in 1972. And so I have highlighted in red the major environmental laws that we started to see being passed in the early 70s. So you get the feel. Now let's take a look at it this way. And you can see, basically, when you look at, this is about 1972, just take a line straight up. Do you see what's happening? Rules, regulations, taxes, fines, penalties. This is a page taken from a book called Ecosystem Management, Status and Potential. It was a 3-day workshop convened by CRS, which is, it has something to do with the government, in 1994. And I almost fainted when I saw this. And here is their diagram. We're going to go from dualism, which is based on traditional Christianity and Cartesian perspectives, to, they call it holism, an ecological perspective, where man is just all part of the agenda, nothing special. I guess you could call us disposable. What is sustainable development? Sustainable development says there are too many people on planet Earth and the population must be reduced. The Earth's resources must be preserved and conserved. The United Nations is the only organization in a position to do this. Amazing, isn't it? We have all these problems, and guess what? The UN is there to solve them. So let's take a look at, there are too many people on the planet. So how are we going to reduce the population of the planet? Abortion. This is what got me interested in what was going on in the school system. Abortion, condom distribution. What? I remember the first time I did a radio show, and it was my radio show. I used to have a radio show. And I was interviewing a man, and we were talking about what was going on in the school system. I was terribly embarrassed to talk about things that you never discussed publicly. You just sort of whispered, you know? And now we're shouting them from the rooftops. We have come a long way. Homosexuality. Why would we want to promote homosexuality? They do not procreate. They adopt, but they don't procreate. Euthanasia. The right to die with dignity. You'll see where they're going in a minute. Dr. Jacqueline Kaysen from Humboldt University did a little bit of math. And her math says that if you put all the 8.5 billion people of the world into the state of Texas, they can live on 1,200 square feet. End of story. End of story. What we're being told is a lie. It has been adopted by most countries worldwide, including the U.S. It is supported by the Group of Eight, an expansion of the Group of Eight called the Group of 20, and other major political groups. It's supported by transnational corporations. You know how much money they make on condoms? That's a lot. It's an organizing principle of the United Nations. I was sitting at my desk, and I was asking the Lord to show me where sustainable development came from. And my reasoning went like this. Is it found in our Constitution? No. What is the opposite of our Constitution? The Russian Constitution. I buy used books. I love to go in a used bookstore. In fact, I bought a few books here. I don't know how I'm going to carry them all back. You know, you get a lot of good material in those used bookstores. So I highly encourage you all to frequent your local bookstores. You will find a lot of truth there that is being discarded. I had just bought an old ratted up book on the Russian Constitution. I hadn't read it yet. So I decided to sit down. I didn't have any coffee. I just thought I'd do it straight lace. I got as far as Chapter 2, Article 18. In the interests of the present and future generations, the necessary steps are taken in the USSR to promote and make scientific, rational use of the land and its mineral and water resources, and the plant and animal kingdoms, to preserve the purity of air and water, ensure reproduction of natural wealth, and improve the human environment. Does that sound like sustainable development to you? It does to me. So, you have to go to the source. I did an interview with a gentleman by the name of Jeb Brugman. He runs a major environmental NGO. The acronym is ICELI, I-C-E-L-I. So I asked him to define sustainable development for me. And he said, we have the socialist concern for development, and we have the capitalist concern for development, and now we're merging them into sustainable development. Let me go through that one more time. Sustainable development is a merger between capitalism and socialism, which is communism. What does a sustainable development say? The soul has no value. You can't get any more wicked and evil and against God than this, because it is life and breath and the soul that we live and move and have our being in Him. Sustainable development says you and I are responsible for the pollution of the planet, and that we are subordinate to all other living creatures. I have been amazed in the 12 years that I have covered global meetings, because at every turn I'm learning about things that go against common logic, our way of life, our way of thinking, the Constitution, just the Bible. And so I was reading, I don't know what you read, but I read documents like the Fourth Women's Conference on Beijing. So I was reading this document, and I kept seeing this phrase, family dependency ratio. And I thought, wonder what that is. See, the United Nations never defines anything. So I started a little list. And I was trying to figure out if I could figure it out. And so I came up with this definition. You have 102 South Main Street, anywhere in the United States, anywhere in the world. Mom and Dad live there. They produce. They have jobs. They produce. Baby and grandparent live there. They do not produce. They consume. What the United Nations, well, actually, the IMF, World Bank, has been working on, and this is being used. There are non-governmental organizations now going to people's homes to show them how much of the Earth's resources they're wasting and how to do it more ecologically. And so the IMF, World Bank, has come up with ways to determine how much you produce at work and how much you produce at home. Then they want to subtract how much you consume. They can get it from your gas bill, your light bill, your Visa, your credit card, your grocery. You now get, even the grocery knows how much you are spending. Subtract that out. They come up with, are you adding back to the Earth's resources, or are you subtracting from the Earth's resources? In my whole life, I never thought that I would ever have to give account for how much toilet paper I use. And my husband does complain. I just somehow use a lot. But I think, to be honest with you, I'm taking what I read and it's just coming out the right end. That's a spur of the moment. I've been enlightened as I'm up here speaking. Well, I'll have to use a little bit more of the Earth's resources. But anyway, family dependency ratio says, what is your usefulness as a person? Do you produce or do you just consume? Are you adding back to society, which would be volunteerism? Now, let me tell you what I think about volunteerism. I think it is very possible at some point in time, I hope never, that somebody will take a look at my figures, how much I produce, how much I consume. And if I come up on the minus end, they just may determine that I need to do 20 hours of volunteerism in the community. All right? If volunteerism, see, our kids don't understand definitions of words because the schools are all mandating volunteerism. If you have to volunteer, it isn't volunteerism, it's slavery. It is highest and best use. Your highest and best use as a person, which brings us into eminent domain. Kelo versus New London passed a year ago, June. They said private property can be taken when it has a higher or highest and best use. So, what does this do? It violates the Constitution and personal property rights. It says nothing is sacred. Everything now can be denominated to highest and best use. Human beings become a number without any value of their own. It's an extension of Agenda 21, and all of our personal rights are subject to highest and best use. It degrades the meaning of human life. So let's take a look at what's going on now with what the Bible says. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. I will be covering next month the UN Treaty on the Lawful Uses of Outer Space, my first one. So what in the world do you think is up there? All right, so we have all these gizmos up in the heavens, the firmament. How do we know what's up there? How do we know what they're doing? I do know that satellites know where I'm going. I have an international cell phone. All I have to do is turn it on. I do know that there is a reason for why we had to get lead out of our paint. It wasn't because it created any problem in us. It was so the satellites could see better. I have been told by scientists that satellites can measure the quality and what's in trees and determine if they have the right bugs or not. I have been told by those same scientists that they can measure the land anywhere in the world 3 inches deep just by satellite. So what else can they see? And God said, let there be firmaments in the midst of the waters. That brings us to the American Heritage Rivers Act, passed in 1998. Now, we're going to take a look at what's happening here in the United States and how everything is being buffered, everything is being zoned. The yellow represents highly buffered areas around our rivers. These are the rivers and the streams that are part of the American Heritage Rivers Initiative. It only took one congressman to opt out and write the president that he did not want his state or the rivers in his state to be part of it. We have one, he tells me, or tells us, is very conservative, and he refused to write the letter. So since I live outside of Washington, D.C., the Potomac is part of this. There is a Clean Water Initiative, part of Agenda 21, that calls for the setting aside of 2 million miles of buffer strips, and you can see the yellow becoming bigger, protecting waters from agricultural runoff by the year 2002. This would be equal to the entire state of Nebraska or South Dakota. So let's take a look here. We have highly regulated buffer zones in yellow, and we have what we call core wilderness in red, which has little or no use. So here is a map. You can just sort of see where the rivers are across the U.S., so you can get an idea of what's going to turn yellow. This is a diagram done by a lady friend, Linda Liotta, on the structural setup of the American Heritage Rivers Act. It eliminates the Congress and the Constitution, which appears to be the modus operandi in society today. And God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together in one place and let the dry land appear. And God called the dry land earth, and gathered together the waters he called seas. So let's take a look at biological diversity. What is biological diversity? It's called smart growth. It's really the demise of the farmer. So this is, all these colored pictures that you're seeing are done by Dr. Michael Kaufman, who has been studying biological diversity for years. They are a simulation based on extensive research as to what the government intends. And what you have here is the core area is red, where nobody can live. That would be like Yellowstone National Park. The yellow is a highly regulated use. Green is normal use. So you can count how many green places you see. This is called smart growth. You and I will be herded into designated smart growth areas. My state, Maryland, was the first state to pass the Biological Diversity Treaty under smart growth. You have it here in Tulsa. Now, how do they end up adding to these areas? Well, the IUCN, which is an ecological non-governmental organization, very radical, very evil, set up different levels of red areas. Your strict nature reserves, which is called the wilderness, your national parks, national monument and national landmarks, habitat and species management, protected landscapes and seascapes, managed resource protected areas. All of these are red. Some of them are yellow. So I was trying to figure out how they add to it. So I was doing some research, and here's the history of House bills and resolutions dealing with the environment, the 103rd Congress. And so as I went through the House bill, and then if it became law, it's on the right-hand side. So the House bill's on the left where you see the color, and if you see a number next to it, it became law. So you can see, for example, how this was a House bill, it became law, it added to highly restricted use. So now we can see what is happening here. Smart growth says that, and I'm not going to go into it, but it says land use planning is comprehensive, integrated, and regional. Public, private, and nonprofit sectors collaborate on growth and development issues to achieve mutually beneficial outcomes. Urban centers and neighborhoods are integral parts of a healthy regional economy. And then lastly, it goes into how you can get transportation options. Those are the high-speed rail systems, the light rail systems that I told you about. You can make a lot of money on them. Ben Franklin said there are three ways for a nation to become wealthy. One is by war and the taking away of wealth of another by force. Two is by trade, which to make a profit requires something cheap. Three is by agriculture, where by planting a seed you create a new wealth as if by a miracle. I am a city girl, but I plant 3 tomato plants a year. I know you're really impressed. And even I was able to understand if I plant 3 tomato plants, I can get multiple tomato plants that cost me hardly anything except for the cost of the 3 plants. And I can have them all through the summer versus having to pay $2.50 for a little few couple tomatoes every time I want them. Well, you farmers are going to laugh at me, but I did some math. But I do know that whoever controls the land controls the food. So here is my renewable multiplication. Catherine Roth's husband did it because it was above my head. You take 1 stalk of wheat, you get 15 kernels. 1 acre of land is 43,560 feet. You can plant 72 kernels per square foot, which means in a square foot, you will have 72 kernels times the 43,500 square feet, and you get 3,136,320 new plants in 1 acre. 15 kernels per plant times 3,136,320 gives you 47,044,800 kernels per acre. If 1,000 kernels yields 1 loaf of bread, you will get 47,000 loaves per acre. 160 acres, you could use 1,600 acres, but 160 acres sounds like a lot of land to me. 7,520,000 loaves of bread. Can you imagine, given the acreage that's in farming today, how many trillions of loaves of bread we can make? The number of U.S. farms in the U.S. In 1910, there were about 6,500,000. By 2000, it's 2 million or less. Here in Oklahoma, in 1910, it went from 190,000 farms to 90,000 or less. If you eradicate the farmer, you starve the people into submission. What is smart growth? What is biological diversity? Now, do you see how the microchipping of animals falls into this diabolical Orwellian agenda? What will smart growth do to the value of your land? I can tell you in the state of Maryland that smart growth, we had smart growth in 1997. In 2000, the stock market crashed. Interest rates went down to 45-year lows. So we had a little lead-in time. The house that I had, that I sold, that did not appreciate it after living in it for 10 years, I sold it in 1998, and it doubled the following year. Now, because of the fact that Maryland is a dynamic area, and Maryland is a smart growth area, and because interest rates went down so people could buy more house with less money or less interest, that kind of thing, that same house, I sold it for $205. The following year, it was up to $305, and today it's selling for $650. And we're talking a 35, 40-year-old home now. You have smart growth. Maywood Park in Oklahoma City, they want to reinvent your morning commute. Look at that. Get them out of the car and on a bicycle. How many of you are going to ride a bike? I see. They are suggesting brownstones, townhomes in the downtown, and they even have a light rail metro system planned. I see sustainable development and biological diversity. I also see something else, and you forgive me, but I keep seeing pyramids all over the place. So you just move that triangle, and you get a pyramid. And the triangle represents a comprehensive approach to creating the urban environment for Oklahoma City. In other words, we no longer have value, and we no longer have dominance over planet Earth.